Thanks for tuning in to the ATRL Charts podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to Chart Data. You're probably already aware of the excellent Chart Data Twitter account. Its ceaseless, timely updates have been cited by countless artists, managers, and media outlets. Now, the operator of the account is launching a full-fledged website, featuring contributions from myself. The website contains more in-depth updates and statistics than the Twitter account does, and it also hosts all-time leaderboards and other fun chart miscellany. Check out the website at chartdata.org and never miss another milestone. That's chartdata.org. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 17 of the ATRL Charts podcast. My name is Alexander, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Aaron.
How you doing, everyone? It's Aaron, you Mitch from ATRL, and obviously with this week going, we have a lot to talk about. So let's just go ahead and dive into it.
All right, he is right. We have a ton of stuff to talk about today. Travis Scott, of course, last week we talked about him, Nicki Minaj, and Ariana Grande in anticipation of a chart battle that they were going to have the week of August 17th. Well, as you probably know by now, that hasn't panned out the way that we thought it would. Travis Scott did indeed debut at number one with absolutely massive numbers, but Nicki Minaj decided that she would pull a fast one and release early. So we'll get into the meat of all this in a second. We have a ton to talk about. But first thing, let's talk about how good Travis Scott did, because he really pulled off an amazing week here. He debuted at number one on the Billboard 200 with 537,000 units, 270,000 of those from pure sales. And remember, that was almost entirely driven by the merchandise bundles that were on his website. I mean, those bundles outperformed expectations like crazy. The pure sales projections for the album were initially under 100,000, I believe. And even on Monday, when HDD put out its top 20 predictions, they were for 170 to 195,000 pure sales. So he truly overperformed on those. It's the second biggest debut of the year, and he had 349.43 million on-demand streams. That makes it the fifth biggest on-demand streaming week of all time. He only got 145 million of that from Spotify. That equates to 41.48%. So 41.48% of Astroworld's first week streams came from Spotify. That's actually just about equal to what Scorpion did. Scorpion got around 41.98%. And recall that Birds in the Trap only debuted with 88,000, so a massive improvement over that. Travis Scott, congratulations on an insane first week.
Yeah, he did pretty good, like excellent. And he has the second, as you mentioned, second biggest debut of the year. And just to mention, the top three debuts of the year are Drake's Scorpion, Travis Scott's Astroworld, and then number three, I believe, was Beer Bonds and Bentley with Post Malone. And as you can see, all three of them have one thing in common: they're hip hop or rap driven albums. So again, just goes to show you how popular rap and hip hop has been for the last few years, and especially this year. Um, for one, I'm very surprised. We talked about it last week on our podcast, and I'm, still shocked that a lot of people, took advantage of the merchandise bundles because, that's really honestly a thing for, hardcore fans and, casual fans who want to have the album and merchandise such as a T-shirt, poster, or whatever. But to have that equate to over 200,000 pure sales is pretty remarkable for any artist, whether it's a no name artist or a big name artist. For those sales to come entirely or primarily from merchandise sales is pretty good. And then obviously the streams are amazing. Those are not to be snuffed at any sense. And he did debut also in the top 10 with, I believe, two songs, which we had predicted and which was predicted weeks ago by our charts analysis on by our chart analysts on ATRL. And, see, I had a pretty good week. There's nothing bad to say about this. He overperformed, obviously. And we're seeing that now even into his second week, which we had kind of talked about briefly last week, where we were talking about how his third week would affect Nicki Minaj and Ariana Grande. But now his second week is actually affecting Nicki because she decided to release earlier than expected. Well, it was originally the 10th, Then it got pushed back to the 17th, but then at the last minute, she put it back to the 10th of August. So now she is up against Travis Scott's Astroworld's second week numbers. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because both Hits Daily Double and Billboard have them neck and neck so far.
Yeah, and Nicki Minaj is what we're going to talk about right now because what's happened with her has been quite interesting. As you might have recalled, right before right before we recorded our last podcast, she announced that she was going to debut a new show on Apple Music called Queen Radio. And the implication seemed to be that she was going to premiere her album on that radio show. And so the album would not come out on the 17th anymore. Well, I didn't actually listen to the radio show, but from what I could glean on Twitter, it was this massive, messy, star-studded affair that lasted multiple hours, and it wasn't just about playing the album. She was like interviewing people. There were these like segments. I couldn't really understand what it was. But what happened is the album actually didn't come out at midnight. The radio show ran into midnight and past midnight, and the album wasn't released. And then she announced that it would be released at noon Eastern time the next day, on which was last Friday. And so I'm not sure I understand this rollout. What I would have done is either drop the album during the show, like Drake did with More Life, though again that was different because Drake literally just played the album. This was clearly meant to be something more than just that. Or I would have had the show on the 16th. No logical reason to release it midday of Friday. Now, it only passed Astroworld for a brief time on Apple Music before falling back behind it. And the initial projections from Hits Daily Double were quite frankly shocking. They're now forecasting 145 to 155,000 total units and just 56 to 61,000 pure sales, not only with a big tour bundle, but with merchandise bundles as well. So that's pretty incredible. We've seen pure sales be in the 200, 300,000 range for many acts with ticket bundles, but for Nicki Minaj, it can't even get her past 70,000.
Yeah, and I'm quite shocked at that because I thought there would be more, and a lot of people thought there would be more than that as well. I think to be quite frank, I think that's a little subpar given given the conditions that she's under with, the merchandise sales, the tour bundle, and this is her first album in 4 years, so I think there was a lot of, obviously a lot of hype and comeback with this album, as preceded by three singles, or the singles that we had this year, which were Chun Li, Bed, and a couple of other promo singles. I honestly thought that the pure sales would be at least touching 100K at the very least, or even at the very most. So it's kind of, to me, a bit underwhelming considering that she had a lot of hype coming into this era with her singles, and then just the overall visibility of where she's been with her collaborations in the last couple years as well, which has always kept her around, not only on the charts but just in the community as well. So it's a bit underwhelming for me. And I know this is a topic that will ruffle many feathers, but when you look at things from a grand scheme, it's like, to have, the tour bundles included with their sales, and also to have a merchandise bundle included with the sales. And also, there are other things going on as well with, offering the album for, $5, which we actually talked about a couple podcasts ago. It's like, what are artists like Nicki Minaj or Ariana going to do to enhance their sales? And one of the things we talked about is midweek, I guess, chart boosters, if you will. And then today, it was announced that her album will be available for $5 just for, I guess, for the next couple of days, basically until the end of the chart period. You can, get the album for $5, and then you also have the chance to get a free 90-day trial subscription to Tidal, the streaming service, and also you will be sent a poster, which is 11 by 17, which is basically the album cover. So, we did talk about these things a couple podcasts ago, and it's kind of funny to see these things actually play out. now that they're neck and neck with the with the predictions, Nicki Minaj and Travis Scott, you're gonna see these type of things happen because obviously Nicki wants a number one, the label wants a number one. It's at the end of the day, it's bragging rights, and then it just adds on to her stats. Um, and then some people are arguing, well, why is Travis Scott fighting to get a second week at number one? He's already been number one. Well, having a long running number one album also gives you bragging rights as well. I mean, yes, you've been number one for a week, but why not try for a second week? And to see that he's that close to her in units, the label's probably thinking, well, why not? Let's go ahead and, add more merchandise. Let's go ahead and add more chances to get sales and more chances to be number one next week. So that's kind of like what we're seeing right now.
Now, I have a few questions to ask about bundles that I'll ask later when we get more in depth on those, but all of that pales in comparison to what happened yesterday. So, in a controversial move, the song Fifi, which we've talked about, 6 9 featuring Nicki Minaj and also Murda Beats, has been tacked on to the Queen track list midweek. Now, the change happened yesterday. I can't recall any precedent for something like this. Even if it happened after the fact, that would be notable, because Nicki doesn't even have lead billing on the song. It's technically not her song, and yet it's appearing as the 20th track on her album. And the big question is whether all of Fifi's activity this week will count towards Queen's first week figure, or only the activity that took place after the edition. I'm leaning towards the forward. I'm leaning towards the former, but to tell the truth, I honestly don't know what's going to happen here. This is unprecedented. I cannot recall a time a song has been added to an album track list literally midweek. There have been times where it's happened after the fact before. I know that Future did it with Hendrix. I believe he added a couple of songs to the end of that album, or maybe it was Future. One of the albums that he released together in February of last year, yeah, 2017. He added a couple of tracks to after the fact, but I can never recall it occurring during the middle of a week, the middle of a first week. So that's a pretty insane thing to do. I mean, what's your reaction to doing something that a lot of people have said that it reeks of desperation and that it's clearly a ploy to get the number one, which of course it is. Like you said, everybody wants to go number one. But what do you think the fallout and the reaction is going to be from this? What do you think are the consequences?
To be honest, I'm just going to be frank and honest. I think it's unfair. You just mentioned that it has been done in the past, but it's been done after the fact. For example, this is a more recent example. Maroon Five's current album. I can't. I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it. But their current album, um, the Cardi B feature was not on the original album, but now it is available on the original album of Maroon 5. But that was done way after the album had come out. I think the album has been out for almost a year now. So it's not like they did that, midweek when their album was out. Because first of all, the song wasn't even out. But, talking about adding tracks to albums after their release, that's when we see it, not when the album cycle is just 3 days old and you're adding what is currently a streaming hit, which is Fifi, adding it to an album to boost your position up on the Billboard 200. I think is a bit unfair, to be honest. Is it a tactic? Of course it is. It is a form of chart manipulation because as a result of this, her units will go up. They will increase. Not sure how much, but it's going to give her a nice little boost. But it's not fair to the people who've already bought the album. Let's say from another service, and then now they're like, well, wait, I don't have Fifi. Why isn't the song on this album, or why isn't the song on my album, but everyone else has it? And it also just creates this whole realm of confusion. It's like, well, why did she do it? Why did she do it in the middle of the week? And to be honest, I didn't think this would catch any traction outside of ATRL because we always think things is pretty local in terms of news being spread around, but this actually caught wind, in a lot of like music blogs and whatnot. So it's kind of other music executives are debating whether this is whether this is fair or unfair. And Fifi was out weeks before the album was released, so it was like you had the opportunity to put the track on the album before the album even came out. You had that opportunity, but as soon I feel like it was very coincidental when his Daily Double released the initial predictions for Queen, and she was trending at number 2 behind Travis Scott. That's when Fifi got added to the album, so it just kind of makes you wonder. She pretty much kind of did this to secure or try to secure a number 1 spot on the Billboard 200. Again, I think it's a bit unfair. I think if this track was to be added to the album, that should have been done prior to the album release and just let the album do what it's gonna do, because obviously Fifi is a hit. It's a big streaming hit. So Logic would say, let's go ahead and add this to the album before the release instead of waiting to see, oh wait, am I going to be number 1? Oh, I'm number 2. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put Fifi on the album now. So it kind of it chart again. We mentioned it is chart manipulation, and it's up to Billboard or whoever is in charge of counting streams for an album, who was the final say on that. Now it's up to them to actually determine if these midweek streams from Fifi is going to be included on Nicki's total for this Sunday's report.
Yeah, and we'll do the math in just a minute. It's very interesting, and Fifi really could make a big difference if all of its streams from this week are counted. And I think my concern lies with the bookkeeping side of this. I mean, if 6ix9ine releases an album now, I mean, is he allowed to put Fifi on it? I mean, the age-old rule has been tracks can't contribute SPS units to more than one album. But this is 6ix9ine's song. He's the lead artist on it. So to say that a lead artist can't put a song that he released on his own album, that's pretty remarkable. And you don't you don't see that every day in the music industry. And so is it going to be on the Queen track list forever? Are they going to take it off once the chart week's over? Once it goes number 1? Once they've been satisfied with that, they can take it off? I honestly don't know what's going to happen here, and I worry about things that might happen in the future. If an album's doing badly, do you just add 5 tracks that you've recorded but you didn't want to put on the album? Do you just add those tracks to the album, then it goes number 1? I don't think that should be allowed. I this is kind of a slippery slope thing where if you allow this to happen without any consequences, you don't change any rules, you don't issue any decree saying you will not be able to get away with this in the future, then more extreme instances of this are going to happen. You're going to have artists who put out albums and they're going to see that the album's not going to go number 1, and they're going to tack on more than one additional track to it, and it's going to go number 1. If nothing's done, I think that's a distinct possibility. And so let's talk about the math here, though. Hits Daily Double is projecting right now that Travis Scott is going to do between 155 and 165,000 units, and like I said before, they're projecting for Nicki 145 to 155,000. Now, here's the deal. That if you take the midpoints of those projections, then you've got Travis doing 160,000 and Nicki 150,000. So that's a 10,000 unit difference. So let's calculate. I mean, how many units is Fifi going to pull this week? So last week, Fifi did 27.9 million on-demand streams. That's according to Hits Daily Double. And remember, that's without YouTube, because YouTube streams don't count towards the Billboard 200. So let's say it gets a little boost from the album, even though it wasn't initially on the track list. And let's say it does 30.7 million. And the reason I'm saying that is because that's a 10% increase. So we're assuming a 10% increase. Now we know that Fifi is doing better than better on Apple Music than Spotify. So let's say that roughly 3/4 of its streams are paid streams, because remember that part of the Spotify streams, in fact, most of the Spotify streams are going to be paid as well. So that's just a crude estimate, but we'll start there. 30.7 million is our, quote unquote, projection for this week, and we're saying 3/4 of those are paid. So if that's the case, then Fifi would get 23.025 million paid streams and 6.765 million free streams. Remember, each paid stream is 1,250th of a unit. 1,250 paid streams is 1 unit, and 3,750 free streams is 1 unit. That's under the new rule changes that just got implemented this summer. So if that's the case, then Fifi would have a total of 20,467 units from streaming, SEA units. Now, it's also selling around 25,000 copies a week, which equates to roughly 2,500 units, 2,500 track equivalents. So I would say that Fifi is fairly likely to contribute at least 20,000 units this week, and it could even contribute 25,000. But that's only if they count the entire week. And the whole thing is that we have no idea if they're going to do that because there's no precedent for this. So I'm almost certain that the projection is not taking the addition of Fifi into account because that just happened yesterday. So if the midpoints do hold up and there's only a 10,000 unit difference between them, Fifi could make all the difference and it could push Nikki to number one. But let's say Travis hits the high end of the prediction, he does 165,000, and let's say Nikki hits the low end, she does 145,000. That's a 20,000 unit difference. It's going to be really close, and Fifi might not do enough. So you can see how this changes the entire complexion of the race. Now, Travis Scott actually responded in kind. He's actually introduced a new set of merchandise bundles on his website. Now, I'm not sure if the original plan was to have the bundles available for more than 1 week, but here we are. I remember we talked about it on the last podcast. There was a banner at the top of the Astroworld merchandise site saying, "This merchandise will only be available until," and it had a countdown to the end of the tracking week. So I don't know if this was the original plan, but there are a slew of items, new items on his website, keychains, hats, hoodies, t-shirts that you can buy, and every item comes with a copy of Astroworld, and of course that counts as a pure sale for Astroworld. So, just glancing at this array of items, these look somewhat cheaper than the ones that were up for sale last week. These are mostly in the $20 to $40 range, whereas some of the items last week were well over $100. So, you see this kind of retaliation, this I'm going to get number one, no, I'm going to get number one, no, I'm going to get number one, and we're introducing more and more outrageous bundling tactics, and we're resorting to tactics like putting a song that you're featured on the track list of an album. It shows that people are really willing to pull out all the stops for a number one record, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree. It's become so much fluid in terms of getting away with certain things because which if you would have fast forwarded back years ago, maybe decades ago, like the only way to have a song or to have an album sell is to literally go to the album store and buy it. Like labels could not really cheat their way into like they could discount albums. I mean, you could discount albums today, but you didn't have this feature where you could say, oh, let's say during my album release week, if you buy the album and the singles that are currently out right now for the album, that also counts as an album sale. Like you didn't have those type of methods back then, so it's interesting to see how fluid those things have become in this industry. So I do think it's a very unbalanced method of really trying to pinpoint, what's fair, what's not fair, what counts, what shouldn't count. And if you fast forward or rewind back about 7 years ago, after Lady Gaga's "Born This Way," her album was on sale on Amazon for a couple of days, I think 1 or 2 days, for 99 cents. Now that had never been done before. So obviously back then that was a massive outrage. And about 6 months later, Billboard stepped in and said, okay, wait, for the first 4 weeks, the album has to be at least, I think, $3.99 or $4.99, something like that. And then after the 4 weeks, then you can discount your album to whatever you want to. So if the album is below a certain threshold for the first 4 weeks after release, Billboard is not going to count it. Maybe Nielsen or the people who calculates total sales, but for Billboard charting purposes, they will not count an album if it is being sold for less than either $3.99 or $4.99 in its first 4 week of release. So that kind of stopped that method of deep discounts in the very first week. So with this being done, with Fifi being added to an album midweek throughout the first week of the album being released, I think Billboard is probably going to reevaluate this method. If they end up counting it this time, they're going to figure out some way to not count it the next time it happens. So I feel like this is going to set some type of rule or some type of impact in the near future for Billboard's counting purposes. And then also with the merchandise and tour bundling, there may be some restrictions coming up with that as well. I mean, we talked about this in a couple podcasts ago, how can't think of the album which one it was, but a year after its release, it went back to number one just because of tour bundles. And then we sat, yeah, and we sat there and talked about it. We were like, wait a minute, okay, this Billboard 200 reflects popularity of what's being consumed the most. Technically, it was quote unquote consumed the most because there were enough ticket sales and enough, I guess, redemptions to calculate or to generate pure album sales, quote unquote. But if you think about it, it was not the most popular album that week. And, I don't know what the most popular album was if you think about, what was what had big singles and what was actually being consumed on both, the streaming side and the sales side. But that was not the most popular album of the week. And, if Billboard was to go by upholding standards, that's what they should go by is this album popular? And in my opinion, that Metallica album was not popular. So going back to this, where you're adding tracks to an album throughout, through the week, once the album is being released, I think that's going to set some type of standard in the future, probably in the near future, as to how you can do that and when you can do that. Like if that's going to happen again, they're probably going to do something similar to what they did with the album sales and having it at a certain threshold. You can add a track to an album the fourth week after it's released, after it's been released commercially, then we'll count it. But if you're doing it in the first, 2 or 4 weeks of the album release, then yeah, that's it. Just it's a bit unfair. And then also, Fifi has the advantage of being a huge hit right now, so the streams are massive, which again gives the advantage of having additional units, additional streaming units, as you pointed out, up to 20 to 25,000 additional units can be tacked onto the album of Nicki's album because of it. So I think this is going to set some type of standard and some type of precedence in the near.
Yeah, I agree with so many things you said, and I want to add on to a lot of them. First of all, though, I think that merchandise bundles aren't as egregiously bad as tour bundles because when you have an act like Metallica, you're paying for that concert in no way because you want to listen to their latest album. There's no correlation. And Metallica fans who bought, even Metallica fans, are probably more excited to hear them perform their classics in concert than any of their album tracks from the new album. So I think it's just ridiculous to count that as a statement of intent that, oh, we want to listen to the album. With merchandise bundles, at least, a lot of the merchandise is directly related to the themes of albums, directly related to the content of the albums. So I think that someone buying a piece of merchandise during album release week, you can pretty confidently say that they're driven by the album, they're driven by the content of the album. But I still think here's the thing. When you're streaming an album, your intent your intent of streaming that album is to listen to the music. There's no ambiguity. When you introduce bundles, you have ambiguity. You can't know for sure whether someone who buys a Travis Scott shirt is actually doing it because they love Astroworld so much. They could just be doing it because they love Travis Scott. They didn't actually listen to Astroworld yet. Now, that's a poor example probably because Astroworld has had such fantastic word of mouth. But the possibility is there. The point is that if you don't have bundles, you don't have ambiguity. When you do have bundles, you introduce that ambiguity. And it encourages the rabid fan army behavior that I don't think is really conducive to having accurate charts. When you have, and we talked about this several podcasts ago when we talked about K-pop, rabid fan bases buying a lot of merchandise does not equal a popular album. Just because a bunch of fans buy like a ton of Travis Scott t-shirts does not mean that the album is popular. Similarly, for Nicki, a bunch of people buying the album poster, title, free trial bundle does not mean that the album is popular. People might be doing that literally just to get a title free trial. And people might be doing that literally just for the poster. There's no way to know. So it distorts popularity potentially. And it's setting bad precedent because it encourages fans to go out and buy a bunch of stuff because if you buy a bunch of stuff, you're going to do better on the charts. And that's not the way it should be. And so, like you, I'm worried that if they don't put new rules into place, like as you said, what you suggested I think would be a great idea. Let's say that for the first few weeks after an album comes out, you can't do anything with the track list. You can't add songs, you can't delete songs, you can't add features, nothing like that. you leave it be, and once it's not going to be, really manipulative to the charts, then yeah, go ahead, tack on a song that you released 4 months ago, fine. But what we don't want to have is the value of a first week being sapped because everybody's manipulating their albums to go number one. That's what we don't want, and that's exactly what this week has been encouraging. So that's the most worrying part of this. I think it's great that two artists are competing in such a close battle for the number one on the Billboard 200. I think that's great. I can't wait for more battles like this in the future. I want close races between the number two and number one albums on the Billboard 200 because that's exciting. It generates press for both albums. It gets fan bases fired up. Everybody's excited. Cool. What you don't want is for that to spill over into this realm of almost farcical bundling, so that you can get the number one above all costs, even if one of the costs is long-term reputation, long-term credibility of the chart. So you have to find a balance. And I'm not saying let's ban all bundles, because that would be disingenuous. I think you have to find a different way to count bundles, because clearly there are some people who were inspired enough by the album to take part in this merchandise, take part in the sale. Because remember, the bundles outperformed expectations for Travis Scott. They weren't even supposed to be as big as they were. So clearly, some of that interest in the merchandise was fueled by the album. So you don't want to ban bundles entirely, but you have to find that balance. And right now, because this tactic is so new, I'm not sure how to do that.
Yes, I think it's going to take a while to iron out some kinks and try to really figure out like what's what's fair, what's not fair, and again with the bundles, like I feel like that's going to take some time to really research how to determine popularity, because in the first week, a lot of those fans bought tickets months before the album was released. With Witness, or even with with Pink's Beautiful Trauma. A lot of people bought those tickets months in advance, and a lot of those artists, or sorry, a lot of those fans, they probably don't even think about redeeming the album maybe until months later or whatever. But again, how does that link to popularity? How does that link to consumership? And that's really a bridge that has to be kind of ironed out and picked with the fine tooth comb before implementing any type of massive change to that. Because I do think bundles should, I agree with you, I don't think bundles should just be cut out completely from the album's consumption on the Billboard 200. But I do think there should be some type of limit, or some type of way to determine what is consumption when you're trying to redeem an album from ticket sales. Like there has to be some type of correlation, and I don't know exactly what that's going to be, but I'm pretty sure there are a lot of chart experts who are studying the same things that we're talking about, and a lot of people in the industry, the music industry, who feel the same way that we do, that are probably trying to figure out some type of way to, I guess, counteract a lot of that.
Right, and it's difficult when you have so much of a stake in the matter. I mean, everybody working at a record label has under their wing artists that are using these tactics to try and go number one, and you don't want to undermine your own artists. That's not good for your relationship with the artist. But at the same time, you want to work towards having a more accurate chart, and we've really done a good job of that over the last 4 or 5 years, incorporating streaming, really incorporating all sorts of different methods of consumption into the mix. We have a much more accurate Billboard chart than we had 4 or 5 years ago. We don't want to let that slip away because of you know these marketing tactics. And so, like you said, there are probably a lot of people that are thinking the same things that we are, and they might have some actual relevant solutions to the problem, which at the moment I don't really know I have any. But let's go back to that in a little bit. Let's return to the numbers and talk about the second week performance of Travis on streaming versus that of Nicki Minaj. So I did the math. I added up the total US Spotify streams that each album has this week. Well, not quite, but we'll get to that in a minute. Astro World has 65.5 million streams on Spotify so far this week. Now, that's pretty amazing considering it's the second week, and remember, only around 41, 42% of its streams are coming from Spotify. So it's going to have more than double that. It's well on its way to having a second week above 200 million streams. So that's great for Travis. With Queen, it's a little bit harder to estimate because for all of the days this week, Nicki hasn't had all of her tracks charting inside the Spotify Top 200, so we have to do a little bit of estimation. But I'm going to take you through that really quick, and we'll see where Nicki's at. So on August 10th, the album wasn't out yet, so I only counted the streams for Fifi and Bed. She did 2.2 million streams. August 11th, which was a half day, she did 5.7 million with her tracks in the top 200. Now there were 8 tracks outside of the top 200, and if all of them did what the number 200 did, she would have had an additional 1.8 million or so, and that's unlikely. So I estimated that she did 1.3 million, and that gives her 7 million on August 11th. Now, if I kept doing that and I came up with an estimated weekly total, I'm going to give you a range between 34 and 38 million streams this week on Spotify. That's certainly not bad. I think it would rank actually in the top 20 or top 20 weeks, maybe even top 10 for first week Spotify streams for an album. It's certainly not a bad week, but it's totally underwhelming. She's only had one song even crack the top 10. That's Barbie Dreams, which is the standout song the public seems to have picked. And even though it's doing better on Apple Music, Travis Scott is absolutely crushing it there. As of right now on Apple Music, Travis Scott has songs at numbers 1, 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 20, 22, 26, 30, 31, 46, and 68. That's 14 of his 17 tracks inside the top 30, and that's actually an improvement from a couple of days ago. On Monday, he only had 12 of 17 inside the top 30. So Travis has already stabilized at a very high level on Apple Music, which is the more important service for this battle, and Nicki only has one song in the top 10 there, again, Barbie Dreams, and only 5 in the top 30. And we've already seen how she's not even coming close to him on Spotify. You can see why her team made the move to add Fifi. So my question to you is, what do you think is causing Nicki to have this relative underperformance on on-demand streaming? We knew that she was a wild card coming into this week. We didn't know how she would do. Now that she's underperforming, why do you think that is?
I think maybe a part of the reason for the underperformance, probably again, going into this album, she didn't really have any strong hits. So I think with that being said, I don't think compared to the Pink Print, she had a lot of people really checking for the album when it came out. Like I said, like you just mentioned, it did, a decent amount on Spotify, but not as what she could have done, like in comparison to, I hate to make comparisons, but, Cardi B, I'm pretty sure had bigger, a bigger number on Spotify her first week. But again, Cardi had multiple hits. She had Bodak Yellow. She had Motorsport. She had the hit with G Easy, No Limit, and then she had other hits as well. So she had a lot coming into this album. She had a lot of exposure and a lot of interest. So with that being said, I think that's why Cardi B's numbers were higher. But in comparison with Nicki Minaj, like I said, in comparison with the Pink Print, she had Anaconda, she had Only, she also had Pills and Potions, which was a moderate hit, but I feel like she had a little bit more interest coming into that album as she did with this album. And I think, excuse me, I think she may have, lost a lot of fans between then and now. I think between 2014 and 2018, that's a lot of time to kind of, I guess, lose interest in, some of the fans that you have, and then coming over to 2018, with what she's having with Chun Li and Bed and Rich Sex. Again, a lot of those hits, a lot of those songs were not massive streaming hits. So to come into this album cycle and to expect to have good numbers, I think the expectations probably on her end were probably pretty high, especially when she had the Queen radio rollout prior to releasing the album. I was thinking she was probably thinking that would generate some streams on the Apple Music side, but apparently it's not really that big, that big of an interest in comparison to other rap acts this year. Um, I do, and I do think, I'm sorry, I do, yeah, I do think that I think maybe there was a lack of interest somewhere between 2014 and 2018 that could explain for that, and I do think, with a lot of the polarization she's had in the last couple years, I think that has done maybe not necessarily significant damage, but enough whereas people are not going to tune in and check for her in the first week of her album release.
Now, I want to ask you some more questions, but first to note, Cardi B did 69.7 million first week Spotify streams, and Nicki's on pace. She has one more day, so that 34 to 38 million estimate that I put out, she's got one more day to add to that. So she's probably going to end up with like something in the range of 40 million. So not as much as Cardi B, but also Cardi B had the lowest percentage of her streams coming from Spotify of any number one album this year. I actually just pulled up a spreadsheet that I had put together randomly a couple of weeks back, which essentially shows the percentage of first week streams coming from Spotify for each number one album this year. Cardi B's first week had the lowest percentage, just 34.4% of her streams were coming from Spotify, and that allowed her to have a first week with over 200 million streams, 202.6 million streams. Nicki Minaj, of course, is not doing similarly well on Apple Music. She's probably, you could say, underperforming a little bit there too, even though she's doing better than she is on Spotify. And like we've talked about, she's well behind Travis on both services. And yet, she's close to him overall, and her pure sales aren't great. So it's like a paradox. It's like, okay, her streams aren't that great. Her pure sales are really underwhelming considering all of the bundles, and yet she still has a shot to steal the number one this week. So an interesting scenario. Now, I wanted to ask you another question. I mean, if you're Nicki Minaj, where do you go from here? None of your tracks besides one have caught on with the public. Barbie Dreams is the only one. So do you just do you not have any flexibility anymore? Do you have to go with Barbie Dreams? I haven't personally heard the song. Do you push it to radio anyway, even if it's not radio friendly? Do you go on like, I mean, you pretty much used all of your celebrity connections with Queen Radio. And that was actually, honestly, that was the first time that the album felt like an event. Everybody on my timeline was tweeting about it. Even though I wasn't listening, I could tell that this was a big thing that people were tuning into and people were being entertained by it. For some reason, that didn't turn itself into that didn't show up in the numbers. I don't know why, but it already happened, and you have to move on. You can't control the reaction, and you probably can't put together another Queen Radio. So now that you've used your kind of like lightning in a bottle thing, what do you do if you're Nicki to make sure that this era is not dead on arrival?
Yeah, I do think that you just mentioned, Barbie Dreams is the standout track from the album. It's the one that's getting the most push and the one that's, going the most viral on social media. And it is holding up pretty well. I mean, obviously, it has promotion in Apple Music and on iTunes. I do think that would be the logical choice to go with right now. I mean, considering, like we said in the last podcast, I think Bed is pretty much done. It's done what it's going to do. And then I think and well, obviously Fifi is still a rising hit on radio. So, she has that to her advantage now that it's on the album. But in terms of future singles, I do think Barbie Dreams would be a logical choice going by what we see so far. Um, and then I see that there's already a video out for Ganja Burn, which is the album opener, which also is getting a little bit of promotion on Apple Music and iTunes. So maybe that would be like maybe the cross pop urban single that she can go with. But I mean, I haven't personally listened to the album from back to front. Maybe just a couple tracks here and there. But Barbie Dreams does seem like a standout track and something that urban radio and rhythmic radio would definitely play. And Ganja Burn does seem like a more pop friendlier track. Not saying that pop is going to actually play it, because I mean, we've seen with Bed. I mean, Bed was pretty mediocre on pop radio, and considering it featured Ariana Grande, who's right now kind of radio candy, that didn't take off. So it makes you thinking, like, is Nicki really gonna have any more success on pop radio at this point? So Ganja Burn is probably the logical choice for that type of for that type of single push. But yeah, I do think Barbie Dreams has a chance. I mean, it's already a hit and it's already uh, predicted to debut in the top 10 next week on the Hot 100. So that's a really, I guess, a win out of everything that's been going on this week with the album rollout. I do think that's a definite win for Nicki Minaj this week, even if the album does not end up going number one and it hits number two. I do think her having that top 10 debut will help out a lot. But yeah, I do agree. Barbie Dreams probably should be the next thing they should push.
And do you think that they should concentrate their energy early, trying to get Barbie Dreams to be a hit right now, and then try to immediately release another single after that, or should they be thinking more long term? Of course, we know that as you get deeper into an era, it becomes more difficult to build streams, and she's already having difficulty building streams in her first week. So is there a possibility that maybe you try and release a lot of videos at once? Certain artists have done that before. Is there a possibility that you do a dual release, even though those have historically not worked at radio? You have to get kind of creative here because I think if you run a traditionally structured era with this album, it's not going to work well. And you have a lot of different options now because in the streaming era, everything's immediate. You can put up a video and get instant reaction. You can release a remix and get instant reaction. You can host a radio show. You can announce that you're hosting a radio show and host the show and bring a lot of people on and get instant reaction. So I think Nikki has to really play off that and find a way to get that buzz from the radio show back and get it back fast because if she plays the long game with this album, it's just not going to work. And this reminds me, honestly, look at Post Malone. Post Malone has had two singles from this album, Beer Bongs and Bentleys. He's had two singles. Only both of them actually. He has only released. Okay, he had two singles before the album came out, and only one single since the album's come out. Better Now. He's focused early. Everything, like everything that took place during the first 4 weeks of Beer Bongs and Bentleys was perfect. He had two hits that were still getting a lot of streams. He had an album that was getting great streams on both Spotify and Apple Music. He had songs on radio. He had, I mean, his name was everywhere. And I think it's because he focused early. He's not playing long term. I would even doubt that there's going to be another single from. I would be surprised if there was more than one more radio single. You notice that the era traditionally would be considered like dead at this point, but the album's still pulling like numbers every week. It's still in the top three, and so I think if you focus early, that can actually, ironically, pay dividends long term. And I think that's what Nikki has to do. I just don't know how she does it. I mean, what do you think? Are there any other tactics that she can pull out of a hat here?
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, I do think that if they go ahead and start with Barbie Dreams right now, since it's pretty much on people's minds, I say go ahead and push that right now. I think that pushing it right now, even though Fifi is a hit, I don't think it's going to interfere at all with any type of potential development with Barbie Dreams, or I don't think Barbie Dreams is going to take away from the success of Fifi, because obviously Fifi is mostly 6ix9ine, so it's pretty much his song, and she's featured in it. But Barbie Dreams is all Nicki Minaj, and that's the track that's been getting the most praise, and a lot of people are taking to it. So I do think push it now. Shoot a video, promote it, send it to radio because we do know that she will get the airplay. She's pretty much a staple at this point on urban and rhythmic radio, so that's not going to be an issue. But to keep the interest in this sense, to keep the streams alive, push it now. Because if you wait, until October to send it to radio, it's going to be dead. People are going to move on. People have very short attention spans, and sad to say, the era may just be over at that point. So I do think releasing it now. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say just releasing it now would probably be in her best interest to do. Sending it to radio, just look at her counterpart or her label mate Drake. As soon as In My Feelings went viral, that was the single. They were like, okay, this is it. We're sending it to radio, and look what's happening now. It's top three at radio. It's still number one for fifth week or sixth week, possibly more. Um, it is still pulling in huge streaming numbers. The video just got released about a week or two ago. It's still pulling in again big streaming numbers, and I think that was smart for Drake to do because we've known Drake in the past. He was never this structured with how his label, how his eras played out. But for views and for Scorpion, we are now seeing that Drake has taken note from his past and is saying, "All right, I see what the public wants. I'm going to give the public what they want," and that's exactly what he's doing. So I think with Nicki, I think it has to be the exact same way.
And the video and radio was so important for In My Feelings because you just knew that its on demand streams were going to taper off. It was having historic days. It was posting days above 4 million on Spotify, which only a few songs have ever done. You knew those were going to fall off. And so his team pounced. They sent it to radio. They put the video out. And now it's doing less than 2 million a day on Spotify. And yet it's still number one on the Hot 100 by a very, very comfortable margin, almost double the number two these last few weeks. So that's a just very well played by his team. But I want to look forward to next week briefly before we finish to talk about Ariana Grande. Sweetener is still coming out in 2 days on the 17th. She's been building anticipation on Twitter. Her fans have been building anticipation. And right now, the coast seems clear for her. It looks like she's going to go number one, barring a massive surprise. Travis Scott is going to have another pretty significant decline third week, probably, because I think this time we'll be done with the bundles with him. And Nicki, of course, is going to have quite a decline second week, I assume, because of how front loaded she's been on Spotify, on Apple Music, as well as her having bundles as well. So, with the only competition being essentially Drake in his like eighth week or seventh week now, doing like 110, 120,000, she's in the clear for number one here, because I think that she's, like I said last podcast, I think she's on track to do at least 160,000, if not more, and that's being conservative. Now, I don't know what's up any of these artists' sleeves now, because the last week has showed us they're unpredictable. Anything can happen nowadays because things are immediate, like I just said. But it looks like Ariana is in the clear for the number one. What do you think? What do you think she's going to do in terms of units?
I agree with you. I think she does have a shot in going number one. As we mentioned before, you know, again, I think the label probably is going to play it safe and probably end up, doing a deep discount on an album through her website some point during the midweek. But as far as maybe tacking on tracks to the album, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I don't think she has anything else to tack onto the album at this point. Um, she's gonna go and just kind of wing it. But again, she kind of has that clarity to hit number one. But again, like you did mention, bearing or not even or sorry, you said if we don't count surprises, she should debut at number one. And I don't want to count this really as a surprise, but it's kind of based on based on what's been going on in the media. Aretha Franklin is very ill, and it was reported by TMZ that she's probably going to pass at any day now. I don't know how true this is, but many outlets, many sources are reporting this. So in the unfortunate event she does pass away in Ariana's tracking week, I hate to sound so morbid like this, but in the event that that does happen, you know, I think because I know a lot of people have this question: if Aretha dies, will Ariana block her? Because I know a lot of people think that type of way, but just thinking about what may happen in the next couple of days or in the next week or so, as many of you may know or may not know, she has not hundreds, but she has tens of albums. I think she has somewhere over 20 studio albums and a lot of greatest hits albums. So in the event that something she does pass away, a lot of her sales are probably going to be split so much among so many of her albums that she may not even get to number one because of that. Because I know we saw that with Prince. He has a lot of albums and he had a lot of sales or a lot of greatest hits albums that kind of took away sales from his other albums, but he did end up placing a lot of them in the top 10. So I think we will see the same for that for Aretha. But as far as anything being blocked by Ariana or Aretha or what have you, I don't think that's gonna happen. I do think she's gonna place a lot of albums in the top 10, but I do think Ariana, as you said, has a clear shot to number one if anything doesn't happen with Travis Scott or whatever may happen in the next 7 or 8 days or so.
Yeah, that's a good point, and one that I definitely overlooked, and I should correct myself. Drake is definitely not doing 110, 120,000 next week unless he discounts or something ridiculous, because he's only projected to do 100,000, 97 to 102,000 this week by Hits Daily Double. So I should have said 100,000 or so. I mean, he's not going to be close to Ariana probably, and that just has to do with the amount of time that elapsed between him and Ariana releasing. Of course, with Dangerous Woman and Views, it was only a couple of weeks. Here, this is more like 2 months. So, or close to 2 months, like 7 weeks. So Drake, not a threat to Ariana this time around. So her fans can at least rejoice in that, even if she doesn't go number one. But she should go number one at this point. Now, that's about all that I had prepared to talk about today. Do you have anything else to say about this week? Anything that is on your mind regarding the crazy, chaotic mess that we've had to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think we did cover a lot of bases in today's episode. But with this being the summer months, I mean, with August, we're now in August. A lot of sales activities and consumption activity kind of slows down during this month. So we're not going to see a lot more major releases after Ariana probably. I know in September, October is when we normally see a lot of like artists releasing and gearing up for fourth quarter, which is the biggest sales quarter for the year. Obviously, with holidays and Christmases and things like that. But I mean, if we're thinking like in terms like just quickly, um, with Ariana and how she may fare with the Sweetener album. It's honestly it's kind of up in the air right now because No Tears Left to Cry is kind of tapering off. It's done its thing. God is a Woman still rising on radio, but not really looking promising in terms of returning past its peak, which debuted and peaked at number 11 so far on the Hot 100. And the video is also out, so that everything that's been thrown at the song in terms of helping it be a hit has been given its chance. Except radio, as we've seen in the past, radio can carry a song pretty high, so it still has a chance of going maybe top 10 in the future. But as far as the Sweetener era is concerned right now, I do think that it will last at least another 3 to 6 months from now. But as far as any long term or longevity past that, I mean, it's kind of have to wait and see until we see if there are going to be any future singles from that album.
Yeah, we'll be talking definitely more about Sweetener in the coming months as quarter four approaches and as awards so awards show season approaches. Even though that's probably less important than it was a few years ago, it's still something that's worth talking about. It always is. And luckily, the little lull will hopefully give us some time in the coming weeks to discuss more broader industry trends and not just spend a whole hour talking about the chart battle this week. Although this week, of course, is extraordinary. We probably won't see something like this for the rest of this year. So let's just enjoy it and enjoy talking about the ramifications. But hopefully, in the next few weeks, we'll have more time to talk about a wider range of things. And so make sure to drop your chart questions, any chart questions about any specific artist, song, album, radio format, chart, anything. Ask us if you want an answer in the official thread for the ATRL Charts podcast, which will be bumped as soon as this episode is released. We already have a couple of great suggestions, and we're hopefully going to be able to talk about them in depth next time. But for now, we've just got Travis Scott and Nicki Minaj. But make sure to, or you can also tweet us your questions. We have a Twitter account at Charts Podcast. It was dormant. We used it originally back in 2015 when we started the show, and I've just now kind of brought it back. So you can make sure to follow us and tweet us at Charts Podcast. I'll be posting updates regarding the show and regarding questions there. Make sure to post your questions in the thread and tweet us your questions. And I keep repeating myself, and I think that means it's time to wrap it up. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
All right, thank you.